are live. Yeah, remember everybody, they can hear us.
Okay.
We are live. Welcome to In Top Form. Today, I'm Dave Fries. I'm here with my host, which we forgot to do last week.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened to us.
I don't know.
But I'm here with my co-host.
Sikdar.
Alex Fries.
And we're going to be talking about meditation. It's not just hippies and patchouli. We're going to, in particular, talk about why some kind of mindfulness or meditative practice matters not just for your health, which it does, but also to the bottom line, because there's a lot of emerging scientific evidence that it's important for both purposes. And if you think that modeling really successful people matters, then some of our most successful contributors to society have either a meditative or mindfulness type of practice. So we've got a lot of really awesome stuff for you today. We're sorry that you didn't hear our new campy.
Should we go back and play it?
Why don't we play it for everybody?
Yeah.
Have people joined us?
We've got
Anybody we've got to
and
say
Joy
hi to?
is on.
Oh, and Joy. So Joy, we will be seeing you soon. Alex and I are both speaking to the event. So yeah, can we give them a little taste of it? It's super silly.
Are you ready to be in top form? You're about to enjoy and be transformed by some killer life and business hacks that we've designed to improve everything from your marketing and management to your fitness, health, lifestyle, and even your travel. You're going to be looking good. Come and get it.
So this is what they're seeing right now.
Oh,
So
that
Lisa's
live.
like,
Lisa.
they
I
can't
know.
hear you.
I don't understand. At least that's what we think.
There we go.
Now we are back. So hopefully you enjoyed that little bit of silliness. So today we want to talk a little bit about the different types, broad categories of meditative practice, and then some of the specifics, and in particular some of the science, and then how do you apply them. We also have, let me see, who else do we need to say hi to? Larry Weinstein, Lisa Snyder,
Fine.
Brian Slater. Welcome, everybody.
Slater's on.
Oh, we've got the liking to loving right off the bat. And I was inspired today. I'm wearing a jacket as a homage to Greg Buckley.
An homage.
An homage. Yeah, we went to see Greg Buckley's show a little bit earlier today. Jumped in.
Great show.
Oh, that's the liking and loving that Buckley inspires in others. So today we have everything ranging from very scientific neuro studies that are reported in Science and Scientific American to we're going to talk about our own experience, and we really want the audience to jump in too. So Joy, do you have a meditative practice? Larry, Lisa? I know Lisa has a yoga practice, which involves breathing. So let's talk about some of the big categories of meditation first. So a very common one and something that a lot of people do is a focused attention or concentrative type of practice,
Right.
where you're focusing on one thing. Vipassana. So Sam, you want to talk about, do you ever use this type of practice yourself?
I actually don't.
I don't either.
As often. Because for me, it tends to be not as relaxing.
And so one of your main goals of a meditative practice is relaxation.
Correct.
So adjusting levels of stress during the day. And the science, by the way, confirms what you're saying here, which you would expect, that this type of meditative practice where this could be as simple as focusing on a candle flame or a single idea, as opposed to maybe a mantra practice where you're focusing on a sound or repeating a sound. But it's just a variation on a concentrative practice. So I don't really use them either. A mindfulness practice, which is open monitoring that they're calling it here. Here's an example. With this type of meditation, you aren't focusing your attention on one object or one thing, like in the prior we talked about. In this case, you're letting your attention flow freely without judgment or attachment, which is hard in and of itself, by the way. In other words, you're simply observing all perceptions and thoughts and memories and senses you're experiencing during your practice. Developing a quality of open monitoring is synonymous with mindfulness. You are mindful of your experience. So this is my ordinary meditative practice.
Right.
So when I sit for some period of time, either in the morning or the evening, I guess it would ideally be both. But by the way, I have an alarm that goes off to remind me to meditate, which is a weird combination of an ancient practice with technology. And for a while, I was training myself to ignore the alarm because it went off at a time that just always seemed to be inconvenient. And then I solved that by just changing the time for the alarm. But I couldn't make it too much later or I would fall asleep during meditative practice. So this one you use too. And the science, again, there's some very good science on this type of practice where, for example, they would show people who weren't in a meditative state per se, but they were in a calm state. They would show them pictures of different kinds of things that would evoke emotion. And they would see that emotion occurring in the fMRI studies. And then they would just have the person label it. So it would be anger, and then somebody would say, that's anger. And when they would see anger, they would experience anger, and it might be kind of intense, actually. And then simply by labeling it, they would see the activity in the amygdala reduce, and stress and the stress hormones and all of those undesirable traits when you're meditating would sort of moderate or mediate. So this type of practice could be something as simple. Well, tell me what yours looks like when you do this.
So for me, I will generally start my meditation with, sometimes what people call a body scan. So being seated in a comfortable position, I will usually use a bolster of some sort. It just helps with the posture.
Because sit up straighter now.
Yeah. Now we'll all be self-conscious about it. But if you're not comfortable when you're meditating, you're gonna be distracted or focused on the discomfort,
the body,
especially when you're starting out. And for me, the idea of meditation, there is a type of meditation where you are going to be purposefully in discomfort, and it's about like breaking through that barrier, whether it's extreme hot, extreme cold, being in some strange posture. But that's not a go-to for me. So this is, first start with the body scan, get my breathing kind of rhythmic and under control, and then just sitting and kind of absorbing the thoughts for that given period of time. I know this is something that you do, and it's important that I do too, is I always meditate on a timer. Because if you're trying to just kind of have the perception of time, how long you've been meditating, it might be a few seconds or minutes, or it might be a very, very long time, which you might not necessarily have to give up.
Yeah, this is true. People often experience this, and there are real parallels between the number of meditative states, what the brain looks like when it's doing things, and when somebody is exploring hypnosis.
Right.
And it is common if you do hypnosis with somebody who hasn't experienced it before, or at least hasn't given it that label, that when you stop, you'll say to them, because there's time distortion, you'll say, how long was that? And they might say, it was 5 or 7 minutes, and it's 40 minutes later.
Right.
And this is the same thing for me in meditation, is you can have this, also it's very much enhanced in the flotation tank environment. Where you could go in and think, Jesus, I've been in here for 2 hours. Why didn't the guy come and get me? And, you climb out and look at your watch that you've left outside. It's like 69 seconds. Yeah. So that can happen. And so that's why I use a timer. We were talking before the show where hopefully the mic wasn't live, although we don't know.
Yeah, we're unsure.
I mean, Alex's nickname is Billy Bush. So.
Jeez. That weird creepy laugh.
Yeah, that was a nervous laugh even then.
Yeah.
So for me, it is often the case, if I'm allowing myself 15 minutes, 20 minutes is better. But if I allow myself 15 minutes, it's not a lot of times until 12 or 13 minutes when the good stuff starts happening.
Yeah.
And I've heard other people say that too, so I was curious if that was your experience.
Very much so.
Do you have that type of meditative practice, Alex?
It's similar. It's not as structured. So generally I try to do it before bed or right when I wake up. And I usually wake up between 6 and 7 and either meditate or read right away. And then if I do one in the morning, I do the other at night. That's usually just how my schedule works out and what I find to be most relaxing and beneficial.
And you have to find something that works well for you. So like evening or night meditation does not really work well for me because, just the nature of what I do, I'm pretty physically tired by the end of the night.
Right.
So that means meditation is quickly turning into napping.
Yes. Well, and for me, it's probably the opposite, because what I do is emotionally very difficult. People think being a trusted estates lawyer, like litigation lawyers, think that that's not emotionally difficult. But you're dealing with people who are in emotional trauma all the time, both when they're planning and if mom or dad or grandma or somebody has passed away and they're having to deal with that. And then there are a lot of times family dynamics when somebody passes away. So when I get to the end of the day, I am emotionally drained and stressed out. So you would think that wouldn't be a good time to meditate, but it actually helps me to return to some semblance of not wanting to be, there's people liking that.
It's mostly Greg Buckley. He also asked, which I think we just answered the question, but
by accident, Greg.
A better time to meditate, or does one just find their meditation schedule? And Brian Slater says, stretching after class with Master Sam clears my mind. 25 minutes.
So I guess I think Greg's onto it. You find your own time, but mine is actually in the evening. Now, not on the weekends. On the weekends, I tend to do meditation in the morning or early afternoon. But on the weekdays, it helps me to get out of the mindset where I would like to become a super villain. When the kids were young, we used to talk about this. Like, if I didn't meditate or keep some kind of, we were training very heavily in those days, that I would drive around in a topless Jeep. Somebody would drive me, and I would wear a leather sheepskin lined cape
or buffalo,
and just burn stuff.
I'm picturing something from Mad Max here.
Well, yeah, it always had that flavor about it.
There's also one where you make a helmet out of a buffalo skull.
These are just the sort of things we would talk about at dinner.
Yeah, when I was maybe 10 or 12 years old.
Yeah.
It was an interesting childhood.
Well, here's my point, is that meditation can help us to be more creative. That got a really good response. Yeah. It can help us to be more creative. It can help us to, expand our ability to observe things without immediate judgment. And it can keep us from turning into super villains. Because I assure you, if I went rogue, it wouldn't be like I wouldn't just do some shoplifting.
If you're in it, you're all
in. I'm all in. Yeah.
Sort of like parking lot hot dog guy.
Yes.
He was all in.
Yeah, Alex and I, this is a little bit down the rabbit hole, but I did actually feel like I needed to meditate after that experience.
He probably should meditate.
Yeah, because the anger was so palpable. We went to get a piece of equipment for this. For those of you who are not observing any difference from usual, we're at a heightened level of technology, but which took Alex quite a bit of doing. And we needed a piece of equipment, so we went to a nearby electronics, actually several stores. But in one of them, there was a man driving a beat-up van that was pulling just a grill.
Yeah,
like a flat top.
Not even a cart. It was
No.
just a grill.
It was sort of a cart-grill combination, but he clearly... I'm wondering if it was a deal with the van or something.
And he had on a knit cap and sunglasses, and he was not exhibiting any of the qualities of someone who meditated.
Yeah.
So he was super angry. That was palpable. And we decided, hey, this guy's going rogue. He's going to flee before the health authorities get here. So we're going to buy some food from him, and just to support this.
Yeah.
And he did go into several rage states while we were there, not just with
Many
us.
rage states.
Yeah. And I think part of the problem was he had a 25-pound bag of onions.
I don't know what that was about.
Yeah, but it was weird.
Was he eating them like apples?
Well, that's what we were worried about. But so again, I don't know who that is, but somebody's
Greg
had that.
Lisa.
So, Lisa, you would have loved this, by the way. There was and then when we got back, Robin asked if he had his health Chester County
If you
food
count,
I'm guessing not.
Yeah, I'm going to say no.
Well, if you count a dirty sign that says "We sell cheesesteak" as a health certificate, then yes,
yes, he did.
have
Just one.
Yes. Yeah. So we've talked about two types of meditation, and the third is labeled here, effortless transcending. And an example of this for everybody is, and I could speak to this, this is transcendental meditation. This type of meditation is classified as quote unquote effortless because it requires no mental effort or concentration. I beg to differ a little bit with that characterization. And as I think the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi would as well. Some have called this subtype of meditation pure being or transcendental because it involves emptiness, introversion, and calmness. I mean, there are parts of that description that are true. I learned transcendental meditation in its heyday. I think I was 14. I had to borrow the money, which was quite a bit, from my grandmother. There was a separate kids price. I don't know if this is still true. And I went to my dad and asked if I could, because I hadn't saved up enough money, if I could borrow the money and pay him back. Yeah. And he said no, because that is communism. So I borrowed it from my grandmother, his mom then. And we had a side deal that she wouldn't mention that to.
That was good.
Big Dave, yeah. Because it was that whole Ho Chi Minh, Mao thing going on then. So that was not viewed as positive. Have either of you, no, I don't think you've ever done transcendental meditation, but you have done the same thing without the label and price tag, right? You've done a mantra, you do mantra meditation. Yeah. So for those people who are worried about the religious or spiritual aspects of what we're going to talk about here, because that's probably an elephant in the room, let's talk about that. So Sam, your practice is secular, I think, Alex. You're not thinking of it as a spiritual or religious practice.
Correct.
Maybe you are. Sam, for you, it has both elements.
Yeah, I mean, we were definitely, I was definitely brought up with meditation as part of our daily religious ritual. The use of mantra is, from as soon as we could talk, it was part of our daily life. And so we had, depending on who was doing it, if it was with mom or with dad, different mantras that we used, to learn and practice meditation. And something that I probably took for granted as a child, because you don't really know what you're doing. But now it's not, in a purposeful sense, it's not spiritual or religious. It's for these kind of side, like day-to-day benefits that I know it yields.
So for people who have a religious practice, these things, even though you may be drawing on secular or religious practices of other religions, these can benefit your practice. And so, for example, I grew up in Christianity, in the Lutheran Church. The other part of the family was Presbyterian. But this type of meditation came very naturally to me, and I craved it, and it helped me because I was a creative, super creative kid who didn't have a good filter for like telling people what I thought. And so meditation helped that and helped me.
Imagine if it didn't.
We're back to the supervillain thing, I think, right?
Yeah.
So, but you and I guess, have been all doing this mindfulness and meditative practice for a long time. And I guess we're just here to say, if you want this to be part of your religious practice or to bring it to your religious practice, or it is already part of your religious practice and you call it prayer, right? That's okay. Understand that the science is going to show you that a lot of the same things are happening in your brain depending on how it is that you do this.
And so like for us, the meditative practice and religious practice are intertwined. By us, I mean my family. So there was never any conflict.
Yeah, and they are for me too, so there was never any conflict.
But for some, they might see like, okay, meditation goes against your religious beliefs. And what we're saying is it doesn't have to. Right. Because it really is just a physical and physiological thing.
And the way I always, I've had this conversation with a number of people who say like, oh, well, this thing that you're doing that you call meditation, isn't that contrary to, your religious beliefs? And for me, it never was, because sort of central to me was this idea that God had created humans, and he had created them with the capacity to find happiness and to be creative and to be kinder to one another. And for me, meditation served all of those purposes. Right. So it was consistent with my religious beliefs, not different from it. And I did not grab my books today to bring, but there are a couple of books on this. and how the use of language and prayer and belief in God and use of meditation, the science behind what goes into them. So we'll put them in the show notes if I don't have a chance to break and go get them. So the main point we want you to take from this is, don't make a snap decision that these things that we're talking about are consistent or inconsistent with your spiritual or religious belief. And if you don't have a spiritual or religious practice, that's okay. You could do these for selfish reasons, which is to feel less stress, or for selfless reasons, which it will make you better able to navigate in the world and to be kinder to people and to understand and discover more. Do we have anybody else sharing with us? Lisa is saying I can't hear.
She can hear. There was I think we're all fixed.
We're all good? Okay. Maybe she was just shouting that out.
No, I asked, can everyone hear us okay? Because Ann Joy said she could not hear us, so I made some tweaks.
Oh, gotcha. And so you're going to be pretty happy, I think, if we hire the intern that we're advertising for.
Yes.
So for anybody in sort of southeastern Pennsylvania, or certainly the Philly west suburbs, we are ready for our production assistant who could do video and audio. And Alex is ready for that as well, so that he can be more fully engaged.
And so we don't annoy John Wyman by having me fill around over here.
Although John, I think, has noticed that Woz actually signed your Apple, which is kind of cool. What are we getting here from Reza?
Reza has a app called 10% Happy.
Yeah, the 10%. And Reza, that's a nice recommendation. And we recommended the book on which I believe that app is based, the 10% Happier book. Is that Dan Harris? Reza will be able to tell us. But this is a very good tool. And by the way, welcome Reza, too. We have some very, very smart people that listen to this show.
Yeah.
Or watch it, I guess, in this case. And thank you guys for joining us. Thanks for liking. And if for anybody that, again, has a friend or family member that could benefit from adopting even this short meditative practice or mindfulness practice, make sure to share this. So there are easy ways to get into this and do this that don't have to be structured as rigidly as 15 minutes a day at the start or the end of the day. Here's one, by the way. In one fMRI study, appropriately titled Putting Feelings into Words, participants viewed pictures of people with emotional facial expressions. This is the one I was talking about. Predictably, each participant's amygdala, that's the part of the brain that kind of creates fear and anxiety to protect you from danger, activated to the emotions is shown in the picture. But when they were then asked to name the emotion, the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, I don't think you need to write that down, activated and reduced the emotional amygdala reactivity. In other words, consciously recognizing the thing reduced the anxiety over it. So this is a very simple practice. And a lot of people get into meditation and mindfulness practice by doing this. I am walking. My foot's touching the ground, touching the ground, touching the ground. I am writing. I feel the pencil in my hand. By labeling what you're doing, your brain is developing a completely different sort of set of skills and abilities that's very useful. We have a whole section that we're going to give you on how different types of meditation affect the brain, and we've got we'll put up a bunch of links in the show notes on the podcast if you can't find them anywhere else till we get the blog up. Which will have links to all of these articles. But I thought this one was interesting. Be it mindfulness, Zen meditation, drumming, chakra, Buddhist, transcendental meditation, there are countless ways to meditate. We're going to go through some of these. And what's interesting is that it kind of grouped in 3 or 4 groupings. They do different things. So one of the things that's really important is to pick a practice that, one, you're going to do, and Sam, you're going to talk about this, that you're actually going to do.
Right.
And I think you were giving some people some tips before this. Oh, here, Reza has sent us something else too. Okay. But also to pick a practice that's going to be the right one for you. So we have science that we've found that says if you are depressed, you don't want to do a meditative practice that's going to cause you to increasingly withdraw and become like centered on self. Whereas that might be a very useful kind of meditative practice if you find that you're not expressing gratitude, you're not recognizing other, you're being frustrated by other people. examining self and your thoughts might be a really interesting type of meditative practice for you. But you found some evidence that even relatively short-term practice physically changes the brain. So can you talk about that?
Referencing a Harvard study from 2011, where they were doing functional MRIs on the brain, they had small. A lot of these studies are relatively small sample sizes, so like 15 men, 15 women, where they were doing on average 27 minutes of guided meditation for 8 weeks.
And let's just pause for a second and talk about what that means, because we didn't really use that label guided meditation yet.
So guided meditation these were people who had no background or experience with meditation at all. So in order to kind of keep the study consistent, essentially they were listening to tapes and guiding them through, how do your toes feel, how do your heel feel, that kind of body scan awareness as their practice, and then it would just repeat. Each participant used different amounts of meditation per day, but the average was 27 minutes per day. And then what they found was those areas of the brain that are used for increased awareness, calmness, relaxation, had a higher density in gray matter. So there was more brain there, essentially. And those areas that were linked to stress and anxiety had a lower
the amygdala.
Exactly. Had a lower density of gray matter. So just within, quote unquote, a few minutes a day, 27 minutes a day, and an 8-week period, so 2 months, people were able to structurally change their brain.
And this is why you probably could see Tibetan lamas and adepts who have been practicing meditation since they were young for the majority of their life on a pretty regular basis are able to accomplish things that we consider in the West to be almost metaphysical and magical. Because one of the things that happens with meditation is that we learn we have a lot more control over aspects of our body that we think in the West are outside of our control. And respiration or breathing is, again, one of those. So labeling is a quick pathway into this, and focusing on breathing is a quick pathway into a meditative or mindful practice. And it's pretty amazing how quickly it actually starts to change the brain. So let's talk about that. We've talked about kind of the labeling. When any of us practice, so anybody could jump in, we're the type of practice where things are coming up and you're either labeling them so you can move on to the next thing, or just gently watching what happens and then just noticing when you move on to the next thing what it is. Not trying to judge it. This is bad or that's bad. Just this is what's happening. So I'm thinking about something. I am judging something in this thought that's going in my mind. Oh, I'm being open-minded about this. I'm relaxing. That is a fairly quick way to start to practice, but you'll be amazed how hard it is in some ways, and then how amazing it is when you just start to become aware of what's coming and going. What about breathing, though? So I would encourage anybody to try that type of practice that we were just talking about, but you got to give that time. Breathing is a way to get into sort of present state. We've talked about this before in other shows, and to become more mindful of what you're doing. So do you have a breathing practice?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to get started with meditation because, like anything else, people have all the tools they need to get started in something. They just don't know what to pick and where to start. So I think that first going back to that idea of making sure that you're largely comfortable sitting down, lying down, so there isn't that external stress of just being in discomfort or being in pain. That said, meditation could be a good way to alleviate if you just have like a base level of pain due to injury or something else. But, sitting down, being comfortable, still having decent posture, and then focusing on your breath. So one like sequence that we like a lot is the 4-fold breath. So that's the idea of inhaling for a 4 count or 4 seconds, holding your breath, exhaling for 4 seconds, exhaling for 4 seconds, and then holding your lungs empty for 4 seconds, and then just repeating that process.
So it's breathing in, holding it for 4,
Right.
breathing out, empty your lungs to a count of 4, and then leaving your lungs empty for a count of 4.
Exactly.
And repeat. And you know, I've taught that in a variety of settings, as you know, and was taught that a number of times as I was learning these things. And people would be surprised to know who uses the 4-fold breath and some of these breathing techniques as a way of calming the mind, because the mind cannot release the neurotransmitters associated with fear and anxiety and danger when you're breathing in that way and when you're becoming aware of it. So whenever you're in, I guess the message here is, whenever you are feeling those feelings of anxiety arise, this is something you could do fairly discreetly.
Right.
But practicing it in the morning and or in the evening, if you did nothing else but that, you would begin to transform the way that your mind and body work together. So I think,
We have a
Alex, you
question
need-
from Lisa.
Okay.
Can you break up the meditation into shorter sessions during the day and get the same results?
According to this study, at least, yes. It was not 27 contiguous minutes of meditation. It was on average 27 total minutes of meditation a day for 8 weeks.
And I think that most people that have a regular mindfulness practice would say the same thing, that doing it more often and getting into the habit of it, where you're noticing these effects, like stress is rising, I do this thing for a few minutes and it relaxes.
Yeah.
I would say that my personal experience is that is good for me and yields results, but the better breakthroughs, the things that help me to be more creative, more attuned to who I am and what I'm doing, more aware without judgment of what's going on around me, those things tend to happen for me in longer periods of time. So I'm not sitting for hours at a time
Agreed.
in isolation. But, you know, if I can afford 20 minutes in one session, I'm getting more out of that than the short sessions. But I think, Lisa, all the science that we were reading does agree, and that in the early stages of meditation, do we get more often? And
Yeah, I think
feeling those
one,
results is better.
just as like a threshold to entry, you know, it's much easier to get started and make a commitment to doing 20 minutes a day than saying every Saturday I have to sit down for 140 minutes.
Right.
That's
That could
just-
seem daunting.
It's going to be very daunting, and it's going to be tough to stay in that mode to go from 0 to 140 minutes. So whether it's frequency of exercise, frequency of yoga practice, or frequency of meditation, one, we have that idea it's a lower barrier to entry, but two, that you have a foundation, you know,
To build on. Yeah.
first, right? So I don't want to try to jump into, you know, this deep, you know, TM state for 3 hours when I've never done meditation before. You know, it's building up to it. All that said, there is a different effect or an extra value to going deep. And it could be deep in meditation, it could be deep in exercise.
And so I liken that to when the kids were young and training all the time. You know, you and I would train during the week, but then we would do a 24-hour discipline camp where masters would come in from different arts, and we would never sleep.
Right.
And we would train deeply with periods of meditation for a 24-hour period straight.
Right.
And that would be like going to a meditative
Like a retreat. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that so Joy has sorry, Joy, I called you Anne. I know who you are.
She shared what she does every day. I do a lying down meditation from 15 to 30 minutes, playing soft music, and then she suggests the yoga station on Pandora. Relax all the muscles in my body, bring my awareness down to my heart, fingertips, toes. My thoughts are pleasant, calming, relaxing, and they make me feel good. Eventually, I start to feel a layer of energy around my body, but I come out of the meditation feeling new and ready to take on the day. And when I'm in this relaxed state, I make the best decisions and do not sweat the small stuff. When I have time, I try to do this 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night.
So again, that probably sounds daunting to some people listening in, but it also sounds quite beautiful.
Yeah.
And let's call this out too, because some people will say, "Oh, what's this whole thing about the energy?" What Joy is doing is visualizing energy, which we do in martial arts training, and which most experienced meditators do. And so I would just say to anybody that's got skepticism about this, it doesn't matter whether that's imagined or not. What we know from science is it has real effects on the body to imagine and visualize moving energy and building energy and taking energy in.
And don't, so one, there is real science that is being developed to support what we're saying.
And what
don't
Joy's
let
saying,
that be a reason not to do something, whether it's meditation or not, is we can often hide behind, well, I don't know the science, I don't understand how that works, and then so we won't do it at all. Whereas, how many things have we done, trusting coaches or mentors, don't necessarily understand how it works, but if I have the trust that it works, I'm going to do it and then get some benefit out of it.
Yeah, and there are people who refuse to do that. They say, well, look, if I don't understand and you're an engineer, by training, and so this is kind of an engineering mindset piece, which is, if I don't understand how that works, I'm not doing it. But that is a story that we all tell ourselves.
Right.
So even a well-trained engineer is probably not particularly adept at explaining or even understanding how nuclear energy is produced at the Limerick power plant, which happens to be near here.
Right.
But they all turn on the lights
Exactly.
and use it. And so just remember that if you're telling yourself, I have to totally understand this before I can use it, you're probably making an excuse. And, it might be worth exploring how you can use this thing that is proven. Now, look, the science on this is changing. We're really just beginning to understand what's going on in some of these brain structures. And in fact, I brought an article with me. We can't share this. We can't put it up, but I'll quote from it and cite to it. And then anybody that has a subscription to Science, Scientific American, get it. This. But this is a mouse study where they are finding particular structures within mammalian brains that when we breathe in particular ways, it triggers a whole change in not just the brain, but in the neurochemistry. And that if they genetically take out certain of these structures, the mouse behaves in a totally different way. So, for example, there was a structure that they noticed would light up only when the mouse sighed during breathing. So, of course, being scientists, they genetically removed the sighing part of the brain. And then they found out that the mice would really just become they were seemingly happy and content, but they just sat around.
Right.
Whereas when they sighed, it had an effect of kind of discharging negative emotion and then was motivating. This goes back to a show that we did on happiness, which people think is the true motivator of success, which turns out happiness just makes you sort of, overly content and happy to sit around and not do stuff. Where anger, it turns out, can be a very useful emotion. And of course, it's never that simple. By the way, thank you, Joy, for sharing that. That was awesome. Reza, do you have, if Reza's still on, do you have a meditative practice that you regularly do? Because Reza is getting amazing results as a very young entrepreneur that you should all be envious of. We talked about Om and mantra meditation. Sam, anything you want to add to that? Which is really coming from a Hindu.
Yeah, one thing I think that kind of gets glossed over is mantra type meditation. We often think of it as like chanting or like having some sort of internal dialogue. One thing that I was taught early on is you can actually use writing as your mantra, which I found to be a very good technique to get going. Because if you're chanting, sometimes the distraction and boredom might set in. But if you're actually writing the mantra over and over again, it's a little easier to adhere to the practice.
Now, there are lists of traditional mantras you could get online. You could pay the Maharishi's organization, like, I don't know how much it is anymore, to get your mantra assigned to you. But the trick here, and what the science tells us, is it's really making a sound over and over again that entrains the brain into a different state than it ordinarily is. And so you see this in Christian prayer and liturgy too, when people repeat a particular prayer over and over again. or sing a particular song at particular points, and it has like a demonstrable effect on the brain. Yeah. That is the same thing that's happening in the brain, at least, as in mantra meditation. So let's just see here. We're going through these. So yoga meditations. There's not one type of yogic meditation, of course, but it's a very old tradition. And in the West, a lot of people use yoga, the physical act of yoga, in a totally secular way. So, the meditative part of it, a lot of times, is either related to pranayama, to breathing, or to something like a third eye meditation. Right. Are you a practitioner? Do you do third eye meditation?
I do not.
I have. You don't do third eye meditation. So what that is weirdly, and I guess intuitively or somehow or another, societies that developed these practices, 5,000 years ago, seem to know that there was a gland located right here, and that they gave special spiritual meaning to the third eye, which is located right here. And so there are meditative practices focusing attention on the spot between the eyebrows where this is located. And the attention is constantly redirected to this point as a way of silencing the mind. So this is a meditative technique where you're going to notice that your mind is wandering, and then you're going to bring it back there. So that's a concentrative type of technique, which is really good if you need to discipline the mind. And so there are a number of studies being done with kids that have ADD, ADHD diagnoses, where this type of meditation is teaching and training them to do something that they would otherwise find a little bit hard without having to give up who they are. They have a choice to make, whereas they might have felt like they didn't have a choice before. Also coming from yogic meditations are things like chakra meditation and gazing meditation, where you fix your gaze on an object. This one, again, for me, this is a concentrative practice, so it's not as good for me as those practices where I'm observing and kind of labeling and trying to prevent instantaneous judgment. But this is one that a lot of people do find useful, and especially if you find your mind wandering and you want to get better discipline, is bringing it back to some particular spot that you're watching on the wall or something like this. Sound meditation, we were just talking about this, and we may have a surprise for anybody coming to Business Black Ops this year. Do you like that idea?
I do.
One of the things that we may have for you is going to give you it's going to supercharge your brain using sound meditation. Do you ever do that? Do you ever use, we should probably grab the bowl that we brought. I'll grab it while you're talking about the meditation. I'll be right back. You guys.
Yeah, so go ahead.
I've never done sound meditation.
So sound,
actually, I have in a Zen Buddhist practice in college for our religion class. We had to go to a practice that was different from our own religion.
Right.
Which I found super interesting. The girl I went with found it extremely stressful because she couldn't figure out the breathing technique.
Yeah. I like that, a meditative technique that's extremely
Did you guys
stressful.
Use a bowl?
They did use a bowl, yeah.
Like this?
It was a little bit bigger than that. But
yeah, so this is just a little one. So, I mean, I'm reaching out, but when you're meditating with sound, you're doing this repetitive motion, or somebody is using a bowl or a gong or creating some kind of sound in a class where you're meditating, which we haven't talked about either, which is, do you ever go to a meditative class, or do you? I go to yoga, and I've gone to group, like sound meditative classes.
I don't.
It's pretty interesting because you're with all of these other people that are collectively, so we've got some liking going on there. And Buckley is here.
He's in here.
But he has a comment.
Oh, Lisa was talking about visualization and how it's hard for her, but sometimes when she does visualization, she's watching waves and water in a Caribbean location, which Greg Buckley really likes.
Yes.
So, visualization, and this is more of the concentrated type of meditation, is something that I used to use and we used to use as a team is that idea. So when we were training, we used to have this thing called Jungchin Tongil, which translates into one mind, single purpose. So typically that was the type of meditation you would do before training or before competing. It's like hyper-focusing the mind and visualizing the match or the form or whatever it was you were going to do next. And that, if you got good at it, seemed to be incredibly effective in terms of potentiating your performance.
And like in a totally secular view of that, neurolinguistic programming calls that future pacing. And you get to be good when you've studied your enemy or your opponent at suddenly intuitively knowing and seeing what's going to happen. And when you do this type of exercise, either alone or with other people in advance, you oftentimes, the sparring match or the fight or the war or the battle, depending on the context, goes very much like you thought.
Strangely so.
And also, when there are differences or interruptions, if you've done this right, you don't fall apart weeping that you didn't get that right. You just go, oh, that's different than what I was expecting. But because you were so well planned and so prepared and so emotionally sort of stable in it, you're able to adjust to that more effectively than you would be otherwise.
And Ken Robinson talks about what he calls being in your element or the element. So it's that thing or area of knowledge that you have that somehow you're just better at it than anybody else or anything else you do. And you have that feeling, oh, when I'm doing this, I'm in my element.
Yes.
And what he says part of that is having really good intuition. Gladwell might call it thin slicing, where you know something for sure, but you couldn't necessarily say how you knew it scientifically, but you have good intuition. So Ken Robinson suggests undergo a meditative practice because it improves your intuition. So when you have an intuition in an area that you have aptitude, you have skill, then you are more likely to be in your element.
And I think the science behind this would be this, which is the fear and anxiety that's sort of produced in the amygdala interferes with your ability to get access fluidly and easily to all of these other memory centers of the brain and to the centers of the brain that are going to creatively put that together in intuition, which is really a simulation or projection or series.
So like physiologically in our brain, we have all sorts of inhibitors. And this is just one way to turn them off or bring them down.
And at the same time to raise up those parts of the brain that are good at making projections and multiple projections. So that's why sometimes we feel like, oh, I guessed that right, and then something goes wrong and you still feel like you guessed it right because it was in one of the scenarios you created. So a couple of things just to help you to enhance this is this tool. I like to bring in an olfactory element to meditation, and then to be able to recreate it. So you could use essential oils. Do we have a link for these guys if they want to get this? This is a product by Now. And it is just the easiest little infuser. You just put tap water into it. In fact, it says just put tap water in. You don't put purified water in. And then you put some essential oils in. And there are various essential oils that you might associate with one type of meditation or another. And then what's happening in your brain, you're linking the smell to this mindset too. And so you can recreate that even more easily. So lavender, for example, has probably a soothing effect. And spearmint or peppermint probably have an energizing effect. And all of these things can be combined into weird concoctions too. But that is something that I have added to meditative practice. And I always just used scented oils, on fingers or skin or something like that. But this is really cool. It just releases the steam and makes the room smell amazing. And then here are the two books. I figured since I got up, I would go get them. This is they're both by Andrew Newberg, MD, and Mark Robert Waldman. The first one is called Words Can Change Your Brain. And then How God Changes Your Brain. This one is titled Breakthrough Findings from a Leading Neuroscientist. So very interesting and very much related to meditative practice. We have some other resources for everybody too that we'll publish, but Happiness, a Guide to Developing Life's Most Important Skill. And mental training enhances attention stability. This is a study, neural and behavioral evidence that you guys might find interesting. Finding mind wandering and attention during focused meditation, a fine-grained temporal analysis of fluctuating cognitive states. Look, those last two are not for everybody, but for people that want to sort of dig into the science or get a sample of it, those are both useful. So again, words can change your brain and how God changes your brain. Obviously, depending on your spiritual practice and sense, you're going to pick one or the other of these. But they're really talking about the same thing going on in your brain, either in meditation or in how you use language and what effects it has. And then this infuser. And now this one, you can, as Alex observed, you could get various sizes which will make different sorts of vibration. And for some people, this is the entry level, this is the marijuana, the entry level drug of meditation, which is that it's, again, easy to do.
And it may or may not lead to other types of meditation.
It may or may not, so be careful, is all we're saying. You may become like a chronic meditator. Either way, we have to be careful. The audiences, see, people started to drop off when they heard the word chronic and entry-level drug. But let's just review quickly. So let's each give one or two ways that people could quickly get into this and start to get benefit. One or two?
Okay. First way, again, find a comfortable way or place to sit down and focus on your breathing. A good starting cadence is 4 on, 4 off. If you want to get a little bit more advanced, whatever that means, you might start stretching out the time. So 7 inhale, 3 to 5 seconds of holding, 7 exhale, 3 to 5 seconds of holding. And as you get better at it, you can start stretching out the time. So like 10 seconds on, 5 seconds off, 10 seconds on, 5 seconds, 15, 7, and just keep stretching that out. So one, the level of concentration and attention to your breath will increase as you change the cadence. And 2, there are probably some physiological benefits to your cardiovascular health as well.
I like that one. I like the idea of labeling. Either just become aware of ordinary things you're doing during the day. I'm touching this paper. I'm feeling it in my hands. I've moved it around. I'm stacking it. I'm putting it down. And weirdly, when you do that, it leads, like an entry-level drug, to the other thing, which is when you're doing a meditation where you're just observing what's going on and labeling it, you're not so quick to judge it, and you're just making an observation of it. And you don't mind when that one goes away and something else comes in, which is a particularly useful meditative technique. Right. Just a little bit harder for most people to start there. But a really good start is one that resembles more like a kind of focused or concentration, but it's not really, because whatever's going on, you're just labeling it and being aware of it. Alex?
Something that was pretty interesting, which is sort of a combination of those two, is during this Zen Buddhism practice that I went to, we did what they call a nature walk, which was you practice the fourfold breathing while walking and identifying what you were seeing and what senses were being activated while outside. So you were actually, your senses were being, in a way, overwhelmed, but you were noticing more specific things and driving into a specific thing, like a leaf or different noises that were coming in.
You're touching on something too that was alluded to in a lot of the research here, which is still anecdotal, but I think that there's a lot of anecdotal evidence on it, which the Japanese, I think, call, or it's loosely translated as forest bathing. And they were doing studies of what happens to people's stress levels and their galvanic skin response and all of these indicators of stress when they would go and just spend time in nature. And so this is kind of combining that thing that science is telling us, standing alone, going and spending time in trees is very soothing to the human body and mind, with a meditative practice, which of course makes perfectly good sense. So we thank everybody that came today. Thank you everybody for sharing resources and your own meditative practices. Thank you for all your commenting. If you know anybody that would benefit from even these simple forms of meditative practice or mindfulness, be sure to share this. Oh, we should give away our first, we have 2 notebooks that we're giving away and a copy of Tim Ferriss's really awesome Tools of Titans. Thank you. So Steve Richardson has one from last week because he went to the podcast and
nice.
Thank you. Steve did a bunch of things, and then we picked his name. Steve is going to get a copy of one of our notebooks that we've created, along with a thing, Steve, that'll just be a little while till you get it, because I'm creating a sort of process of how I do note-taking and indexing and to-do lists in those, and so we're going to send those to him. But we still have 2 more to give away this month, so be sure to let us know if we see if you're commenting. If you like the page, we'll see that too. If you go to the podcast and give us a star review or post a review, you're getting entered. I think we're entering people that do that like twice, so they get like a little benefit.
Nice.
Are we saying it has to be a good review though?
No, just any kind of review. I mean, it would probably be a weird coincidence if somebody gave us a really great review and then they won one over somebody that gave us a terrible review.
Totally random.
That would be
very
random. Especially when it comes to giving away a copy of the Tools of Titans, which is just a massive book. So see, I just want to show you, I held myself to 2 books, and it's really kind of one book, depending on whether you're religious or not. So just throwing that out there. And then
I see 2 books.
I just want to...
I know what you're trying to do.
I just want to end by saying that we had Indian food for lunch at the pre-production meeting, which you labeled a microaggression, a trigger, and cultural appropriation.
That's right. That's right.
So it was delicious.
It was a hat trick of...
But you have to admit, that was darn good cultural appropriation. Like, delicious.
It was very good. Now, for what it's worth, you bought the food.
Yeah,
but an Indian made the food.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it's kind of, there may be even more bad qualities to it. I don't know. I think I was supporting, it was definitely capitalism at work.
Yeah.
I was supporting a business. So I like
a good business.
Yeah, a very good business.
Yeah, they make good food.
And I made a discovery, thank you, that I made a discovery that Himalaya has a lunchtime buffet on the weekend.
Oh, yes.
So just alerting everybody to that who lives in Pennsylvania. So listen, everybody, thank you. It was awesome. Remember to like, share, leave a review, listen to the podcast, and get yourself a meditative or mindfulness practice going, because it is going to go both to the issues of improving your health and to your bottom line. So thanks for being with us. It was great.